Hey, this is Shawn Thomas, and welcome to the Worship Together podcast, featured exclusively here on our Worship Together social media feed. This program is part of our ongoing outreach to create an online community of faith where believers can support one another and share their life experiences and testimonies, and most importantly, worship together. Each podcast episode is part of a 3-part series, and each series will focus on a variety of topics, and sometimes we'll even feature a guest host. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this Worship Together podcast episode. All right, everyone, and welcome back to the Worship Together podcast. I'm excited to get to be with you again. It's been a minute since we've had one of our 3-part series podcasts. We had Thanksgiving in there and Christmas and New Year's, so I hope that you and your family had a blessed Christmas and a wonderful New Year. And this is a great way to start off something new on Worship Together for 2023, because for this series, and by the way, if you're not familiar with our podcasts, the way this works is we do them in 3 parts, and then we take a few weeks off and we come back and we do another 3-part series. And so for this 3-part series, our topic is our posture in worship. And I'm excited that I have a special guest with me, my friend Caleb Holgerson, who is the host of Worship Leader Coaching. So say, hey, Caleb.
Hey, how we doing, everybody? Man, Shawn, it's so good to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so thrilled to get to talk to the Worship Together crowd.
And listen, and you've been with us at Worship Together since the beginning, so I really appreciate that too. And I appreciate you taking time out of we were talking about that even before we started, to take time out of your schedule for this podcast and to share with us some of the little nuggets that you have about leading worship and what worship is. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more so folks know who you are and what Worship Leader Coaching and anything else you want to share about it.
Yeah, so like Shawn said, my name's Caleb Holgerson. I run a site called Worship Leader Coaching. The website's worshipleader.me, where I just share about leading worship primarily. So I talk with a lot of worship leaders, worship directors, music minister type people. And so I've been doing that for a few years. And that's kind of how me and Shawn got connected, was I think through an Instagram post or two, where we were both sharing some worship leader content. And so, so I do that, and it's a lot of fun. I also serve a church here in Missouri. It's a worship pastor there.
Awesome. What's your church, your home church there?
It's called Northbridge Church in Springfield, Missouri. Awesome.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, so our overall, like I said, our title for this series is Our Posture in Worship, and kind of the theme, and this is a quote that I took from one of your videos, Caleb, is our physical posture reflects our heart's posture. And so we're going to split this up. And folks, what I've done is Caleb has a great resource in this Worship Leader Coaching site that he has, and there's some videos on there. And so there's 3 videos in particular, and we're going to talk about each one of them in these 3-part series. So the first one we're going to talk about is why we lift our hands. The second one is why we sing, and then the third one is actually tailored even more towards people who lead worship in church, and it's about choosing songs prayerfully and intentionally. So for each week, we'll be talking about one of those. And this week, we're talking about why we lift our hands. And so, Caleb, actually, just talking about our posture in worship and that quote that I just had that you said in one of these videos about physical posture reflects our heart's posture. Can you tell us more about that? Or I love that quote.
Yeah, I think I stole that from somebody. I think that's one of those lines that came from somebody else, and I started repeating it, and then I forgot who it was that originally said it, and so I just take credit for it now.
That's all right.
I've seen that to be true as a worship leader and as a Jesus follower, and I'm sure you have too, Shawn. Where you can when I'm on stage leading worship, I get to see the whole room. Mm-hmm. And so I can see the expressions on people's faces. I can see the things that they do. I can see if they're checking their watch or packing up their bag because they're ready to go.
Check on their phone.
Say that again?
Scrolling through their phone.
Scrolling through their phone. Yep. All those things I see. And I also see the worshipers, the people that they are singing with everything they have. They have their hands in the air. They are kneeling before the Lord, doing all those things. You see all of that. And what I found is, your physical posture It reflects your heart's posture. If you're sitting there kind of, arms crossed and sort of rolling your eyes when the music stops and the preacher begins or something, well, your heart's not really in what we're doing. And that's not to say that you're not a Jesus follower or that you don't love to worship even. It's just in that moment you may not be.
Yeah,
And
and you're
so,
distracted or something. Yeah.
so what's that?
You're it's like you're distracted for, the world has
Right.
got your attention.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, that's something I've been kind of just sharing with folks for a little while now. It's just, yeah, make sure that your hands and your heart are aligned.
Yes. And so in this first video that we'll have the link in in the show notes for the podcast, you were talking about why we lift our hands, but that could go for any expression of worship. If it, whether it's clapping or kneeling or whatever it is, praying out loud or praying silently, all the different ways, bowing your head, lifting your face up, they're just all different kinds of expressions. And I think you talked about in the video that these were our way of having a declaration of worship through how our posture is, that we're declaring our worship according to how our posture is. And I love that.
Yeah, it's a declaration of faith. I mean, it's similar to, if you, this is kind of dumbing it down a lot, but if you were to give somebody a thumbs up for, yeah, this is great. Or, you're at a sporting event, you threw your hands in the air, you're excited about what's going on. You're kind of, throwing your fists in the air, getting pumped up and excited. That's the same sort of thing.
Yes.
When we talk about our postures of worship.
Absolutely. The video, it looks like you had just finished singing Phil Wickham's "Battle Belongs,"
Yes.
because you were referring to the lyrics, and I thought that was really cool. You referred to the lyric talking about fighting on our knees, our hands lifted high, sing through the night. These were all just examples of posture. And then this is so important. You stated how when we're talking about why we lift our hands or why we do any of these things, that there's biblical precedence for all of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think as Christians, as Jesus followers, we all like to say that, the Bible is our guide. But there's some things that we just tend to do because that's just what we've done in church. And we forget to look at where that came from, where in the guidebook it is. And
instead of going through the motions, why are we doing it?
Right. Why are we doing it? Why do we look around on, a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or at a revival and we see, okay, there's music going and, okay, we get that the church sings together. Why are these people lifting their hands? Why are these people kneeling? Why are these people doing these things? And, if you look through scripture, there's, for kneeling, we find Jesus doing that. He gets on his knees in prayer all the time. We see him there, in the garden before he's arrested. He's on his knees in prayer. He asks his disciples to do the same thing. Well, I think we can follow Jesus there pretty easily, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. But there's biblical precedents for lifting hands as well. I mean, in Exodus chapter 17, there's Moses and Joshua. This is such a cool story in scripture. Moses and Joshua, they're going to war against the Amalekites, and Moses is the leader of the people, but Moses doesn't actually lead the war here. He hands that off to Joshua, and he goes up on a mountain and lifts his hands and begins to pray. And that lifting his hands there is almost like just saying, God, I surrender to you.
Just letting go of the
That's
control.
Right. I'm letting this go. I know these are my people. I've been the leader here, but God, I'm giving this to you. I surrender. And what we find, if we read through that in Exodus 17, every time that Moses drops his hands, he begins to lose. Joshua begins to lose. The Amalekites begin to advance. Yeah. But every time he lifts them back up, they begin to win. Yeah. So surrendering to God. That's just one example of what we find in Scripture when having a posture saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm not just going to say I surrender. I'm going to do something. I'm going to take my hands off of this."
Yes. Yeah. I agree. Having that biblical reference is important because there is reason for why we do things, and there should be reason, especially in worship. It should be intentional. We don't just just winging it or just doing things because it's fun. There's a reason. There's precedence, and it's based in Scripture. One of my favorite, more controversial in some churches, expression of worship is clapping, especially if it's after something that's happened, and there's always this argument back and forth. Well, we shouldn't clap for somebody because this is not a performance, or this is not a, and I get all that. I understand what that's at, but it's then the flip side of that is you're kind of missing the point of, I mean, the Psalms are full of encouraging clapping the hands and, celebrating and those kinds of things. So one of my favorite experiences when I was directing a choir one time was there was a song we were doing and the choir was supposed to clap. It's even marked in the music, like where they were supposed to clap. And an older gentleman that was in the back row of the basses finally just interrupted me and said, I'm sorry, I don't clap, and I prefer not to stand next to someone who claps.
Oh, wow.
I really didn't know what to do with that. But yeah, I mean, I'm just telling that story just because it's funny, and it's whether it's kneeling or raising hands or speaking in tongues even, or whatever it is, there's all sorts of different kind of things. Clapping, that's depending on your experience that you already have in worship, you might be uncomfortable in witnessing in that or seeing that around you in another experience of worship, but it's all based, there's precedence for it in Scripture.
Well, can we talk about comfort in our churches for a minute?
Yeah.
So I think our culture, our if you're listening to this in the United States, or you've been to the United States, then you probably know our culture is very much about comfort and about what makes me feel okay, what makes me feel good. And to an extent, that's probably okay. I don't want to be uncomfortable, but in worship, it's not about you. It's not about your comfort. Right. And, so yeah, it may be uncomfortable.
That's hard. We got to remember that. It's not about me. That's not why I'm at worship today. This is not about me.
Yeah. Or the other thing is, okay, well, I lifted my hands. I tried that, but I didn't feel anything. Well, it's not about a feeling. Yeah. It's about surrendering to God, or it's about praising God, or it's about, calling on the power of God.
Oh man, you're preaching it. That's great. Yes, that's wonderful. Yeah. You were talking about surrendering, if we're talking about lifting hands, or whether it's praise, and it's, that experience that I think in the video you talked about that. One of the things that happens when we express ourselves in worship, and I love this ties into what you just said, that it's not about us. It's about, and you'd said, experiencing the touch or the power of God. That's part of the purpose of that worship, is for us to become closer to God, to experience the power of God. And so as I heard that, I was just throwing in all these other attributes of God, to experience the love of God, to experience the grace of God, to experience the peace of God, to experience the healing of God. I mean, that's worship.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that's what's so amazing about, our God is, worship it means to ascribe worth, right? So it's giving God glory. Yes. But what it's so great about our God is that he loves you so much that when at that time that's designated for him, that all your focus should be on him and his glory, he does something for you.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, right.
Because he has, God is not obligated to do anything for you or me. He's the Almighty.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
We should count ourselves lucky to get to go to him, but we don't. We take it for granted. But but we do. We get the opportunity to go before God and to worship him, and even in that, when it should be all focused on him, he focuses his love on us, and it's just incredible. That should be a mind-blowing thing.
It is, yes. And I mean, it takes us back to how we started this whole conversation, that our physical posture reflects our heart's posture. And, and so if we're going in there with our heart's posture being that this is about me, what am I going to feel? What am I going to, what am I getting out of it, for lack of a better way of saying that, versus, coming in there to become closer to God, to experience God's power, to experience God's love, God's peace, God, grace, those kinds of things. So yeah, the physical posture reflecting our heart's posture. That's gold, Caleb. That's some wise words right
Thanks,
there.
man. Thanks, man. Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
No, listen, and thank you. I don't want to. We've got more to talk about, but I want to keep them for some of these other episodes. So, thank you for being with us and kicking this one off. Listen, everybody, we are going to do an episode next Friday. So this will be the next 3 Fridays today, and the next Friday we're going to be talking about why we sing. So today we kind of did the physical posture. We're going to talk about some vocalization, I guess, and then our third week we'll be talking about choosing songs. And so these first 2 weeks we're kind of focusing on just the worshiper in general, and so obviously the third week that can include the worshiper as well. But we'll also talk kind of targeting people who are involved in leading worship and making choices about worship. And so choosing songs will be our third episode. So Caleb, thanks for being a part of this. And thank you for everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you next week, Friday, anytime afternoon. You'll be able to catch the podcast. God bless everyone.
See you guys.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Worship Together podcast. Be sure to check out our show notes in the comments below this post for additional information about today's episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, help us out by spreading the word about our Worship Together feed and invite your friends and church family to join us at worship-together.com.